American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tellustrate video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
What time is it? Game time! It's gonna be special. They gonna talk about this forever.
Welcome to American Football Stories.
Puts his head down, crashes and spins, and dives. Touchdown!
Bringing together the many perspectives that make up college football in the NFL.
Football is one of the greatest sports ever invented.
From players and coaches.
Believe, baby, believe, baby.
Hey, we playing to win right here, fellas.
To the front office and scouts.
The public is finally beginning to catch up, but they don't even know half the truth.
Us against the world, let's get it.
Your hosts, Robert Parker and Nick Knudsen, bring you American Football Stories.
Welcome to the American Football Stories podcast, brought to you by Coach Paint. My name is Nick Knudsen. My co-host is Robert Parker. It is April 6, 2021. And our guest today is Mr. Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Last Thursday, Matt released his much-anticipated annual publication of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, which is an in-depth look. I'm talking 1,000 pages plus PDF. I knew Matt was detailed, but I opened up my copy of it, and I was still impressed. 1,000 plus page PDF, giving you every piece of Matt's in-depth analysis. Like, it's everything you'd want to know about quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends for this upcoming draft here. It's been open on my screen since I downloaded it last week on Thursday, and I've referenced it probably about 100 times already, and I'm sure I will do it hundreds of more times going in here in the off season, and especially lead up to the draft here in the next few weeks. I want to go, before we jump over to Matt here, I just want to plug it. It's awesome product, guys. You just go to mattwaldmanrsp.com. You can download a copy of your own. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's just $19.99, right?
It's $21.95.
$21.95 that's after tax, right?
That I do a pre-sale in December, and
okay.
So it's $19.95 back then, but now it's $20.
Okay, maybe I got in on that one. Maybe I got in on that. All right, $21.95, guys. It's $20. You know, you spend $20 every time you go out to eat. I'm telling you, this is a great purchase. If you are into the draft, if you want to know what your team's going to do, go out and check this out for Matt Waldman. So, Matt, I know this time of year is busy for you, but in case you can't tell, we're fired up to have you on. We appreciate you making the time for us tonight. And I want to know, the first question out of the gate is, have you had a chance to catch up on any sleep, or you just don't sleep in April?
It's funny. This is the first year. It would be shocking because this is the most content that I've probably put out in the smallest package of an RSP. It's been longer in the past. But a lot of it was supporting information. This year was legit like 900 pages worth of content. But because I restructured everything, I actually got more sleep. I actually slept through April and even got to do some outside stuff in addition to writing the RSP because of what I've been putting into it throughout the year. So this has been the strangest year for the book because it's come out like I don't sleep whatsoever, when in the past years it was like that. This year was actually, in some ways, the easiest one I've ever done.
Hey, 2020, you're not having all those commitments, those birthday parties to go to and everything, right? A little extra time in your pocket this year.
That's right. I mean, the clown show is not going on right now, so I don't have to put on the paint.
All right, Rob, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just like you said, just like Nick said, Matt, we're glad to have you back on. And let's just go ahead and dive in and just talk about this rookie scouting portfolio. So my first question off the rip, Matt, is could you walk us through your process in writing the rookie scouting portfolio? Do you bounce around from position to position or jump around and pick players at random? What is your process going into building this beast of a rookie scouting portfolio?
Sure. You know, I mean, it really starts with what I did back in 2006 or 2005 when I started building this, is that I use a process that that I basically borrowed from best practices in the operations sector of different industry work that I had done. And it was designed so it builds on itself. Like the more you realize what you don't know, the more you have to define things clearly. So that's kind of built on its own. And then, so I have this structure in place of over 16 years worth of refining it. And then when it comes to watching players, I mean, really what happens is I have some spreadsheets that I use that have all the criteria on it. You see everything in the RSP, pretty much what I do, but the spreadsheets are in there with all the criteria that are checklists that I go through. And I'll get like Phil Steele's, preview, book, that mini phone book that he's got out every year, and I'll get that and use that as a way to identify who are the top prospects according to the media. That's about as much as I usually know about them. Again, like I've joked that I didn't know who Lamar Jackson had won the Heisman until like the following July. Well, I just found out 2 weeks ago that Devonta Smith won the Heisman. So, I mean, that's how much I shut myself out of this stuff in terms of the narratives. And I just decide I'm feeling like watching, some running backs today. So I'll watch running backs, maybe, and I'll watch, 2 to 3 games of a guy, maybe more, depending on how fast it goes or how slow it goes. And then I'll switch to another position if I feel like it. Sometimes I'll do 2 to 3 different positions in a day. Sometimes I'll just stick to one position for like 2 weeks because I'm just, quarterbacks, I tend to stick to the position and just do that straight through. And then I'll leave that alone. Usually I'll watch like previous year's tape during the summer. And then like I'll wait till probably about November or December, if not January, to watch them again from the season that just was. And with quarterbacks, with running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, I tend to just watch them whenever. It just whatever hits me. I pretty much make sure that I'm watching 2 to 3 a day, and pretty much trying to watch 2 to 3 games each time that I watch that player, so that I get at least a minimum of 4 to 6 games watched. But this year, for instance, I watched with a lot of players, I watched 8 to 12 games in terms of not watching, how would I say that? Tracking, like literally documenting everything I saw and tracking for the data that's in the RSP. I watch more games than that, but those are the games that I officially track. I'll watch, like at the end of the year, what will happen is I'll see there's things that I haven't seen yet, like maybe I haven't seen the quarterback throw against a certain type of coverage, or I haven't seen a receiver run specific type of routes yet. And then I'll go back and watch tape to find those routes where it takes less time because I may have seen, I've seen enough about other things. I'm looking for specific stuff at that point. So I'll go through a lot more games than that, but that's kind of how that works. And then usually I have about 100 to 120 players by about January. And then I'm shoring everything up so that in March, I'm just writing the book. And then I have a team of editors who help me out so that I send them a schedule and say, well, this is what it looks like it's going to be. The schedule will be, and I'll have these completed by these days if you can turn it around with edits. And then for the final 3 to 4 days before I put the book together, I look at their edits and then put the book together in a PDF format.
That's awesome. It seems like a lot of work. I know you said you got some sleep this go around because how you structure everything, but just kind of give our audience a baseline view of how many hours you kind of put in on an average. Just break it down, film, and just watching these players per day.
Yeah, I watch a lot. So it's, I would say that between say June and December, I would say I probably watch a good 25 to 30 hours a week at least. And that's not including NFL film, because I spend probably another 40 hours a week watching NFL stuff for football guys, writing about pro players. And that informs my college, how I look at college players, because I'm studying the pro game for probably 40 hours a week throughout the entire season. And then I take notes of that for the following year's RSP to see if there's anything that I need to update. And then I'd say from about Thanksgiving through April, I'm probably watching closer to 70 to 80 hours worth a week of film. I would say that's probably what's going on at that point
for college.
For college, yeah,
Yeah,
just college, and the pro goes by the wayside until September. So
do you need us to tell you who won the Super Bowl?
I think I saw
no
that.
Spoilers.
I know spoilers. I did see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver core in awe over Patrick Mahomes trying to win the game by himself without an offensive line while losing big time.
Just for reference, if this is anyone's like Matt watches exclusively film, right? You're not sitting there on Saturdays watching the games.
No, I don't.
In case anybody hasn't heard you before.
No, yeah. I don't watch games at all. I mean, like
you're just all film all the time.
Yeah, one game. I've watched one game this past year, for the fun of it, just for the fun of it, and it was the Cleveland Browns Baltimore Ravens game in Cleveland on
Monday
Thursday
night
game,
or Thursday
night game.
Yeah,
it was either Sunday or Thursday night. I don't remember which one.
Yeah,
and it was fantastic. And that was,
it was.
But pros kind of like the fun thing for me. Like I'm an NFL fan, so I will watch. I'm watching the games for work, but those are fun for me. College to me is just work. It's like I'm here to evaluate players. I don't care about the score other than just if it's something's in context of what I'm watching. I don't care about who's up for an award, who's winning the SEC, who's winning the ACC. I don't care. I don't know, don't care, don't even look at their records. I don't do any of that.
Well, Matt, that's a great segue into our next question. Because just for our audience out there, could you tell us what is the difference between what you do as far as breaking down film with the rookie, scouting portfolio versus to what an NFL scout does in regards to, breaking down film and going through their process?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some big differences. I mean, we both watch film, that's for sure. We both have very different processes. And we'll talk about some of those in a minute. But the main difference is right off the bat is that they have to spend a lot of time researching about what the players' practice habits are like, how they are off the field. Are they good students? Are they good students of the game? Are they good citizens? Have they had any issues that the team that they're going to have to report back to the team and help determine, or at least give accurate enough information so that the team can determine whether or not this is a player worth investing in and taking a chance on? Because all people are in this particular age group are maturing, and I can't tell you how many times as a manager or a director, I've hired people who I've seen notes from judges, or different things where they're like, this was kind of something that happened 3, 5, 7, 10 years ago. And they were absolutely great employees, like indispensable and fantastic leaders, but they made mistakes that, 18 to 22-year-olds often make. So, things like that, they have to look at those types of things. They have to have those types of conversations and do that kind of investigation and background, whereas I don't. The difference is in terms of how we study players. Most NFL teams have a system that's with a grade of a 1 through 7. I think maybe it's a 1 through 9, but really no one, it's just like evaluations in corporate America. No one really gets scored below a 3. No one ever gets scored really above a 7 unless there's high up approval from top of the leadership chain to give that type of a score, just like when you do evaluations in corporate America. And there's a lot of variation because it's not always well defined what it is that they're looking for. Like they'll have criteria, but it doesn't define what that criteria is. And I talked to guys like Matt Williamson, who's a scout for the Cleveland Browns, or Russ Landy, who's been scout with the Rams and the Browns, and as the personnel head of U.S. scouting for the Montreal Alouettes right now, who's on my podcast every couple weeks. And my system is more defined in terms of everything that you're looking for. There's a definition for it and what the score means for it. And if something I look at doesn't fit the definition because I haven't seen that before, or there's a new way of looking at that maybe I need to redefine, then the next year or the next couple of years, I'll redefine that criteria point and decide how I'm going to weigh that and change it. Whereas with the NFL, they've had the same basic system since Blesto was around in the 1950s and 60s and scouting for everyone. And they've never gone through what is it that we do? Now, there's some great scouts. Like, I'm not saying I'm a better scout than guys who've been doing this 20, 30, 40 years. Those guys are incredible. And I would be honored to be able to get to sit in a room and scout with them and learn from them or watch them do their job. But their system, they've learned in spite of their system, and they make adjustments probably on their own. And the best teams are always like, what is it that we're looking for in a player? And they're aligned with their coaches, with their scouts, and with their front office about what they're looking for, even if their grading system sponsors a lot of variation. And see, my grading system was meant to like reduce variation and to make a subjective thing as objective as possible. And therefore, if it doesn't fit something in with your system, you can then address it and continue to learn from it. Whereas with them, they haven't done that. So what happens is, like, say we were gonna, Robert, say we were gonna hire like Nick to answer the phones for your business, and we had 5 people in your business that were going to decide. We asked them, well, how should they answer the phone for your business? What should the greeting be? Well, they all could have worked. Half of them could have worked in that capacity of what Nick's about to do. Half of them could have been leaders who've had people doing that before, and they all may give you a different answer. And the fact that they give you a different answer for just a routine task and of what's expected, think about important tasks like, the guy who's going to be managing your operation, like your quarterback, or someone who's going to be a big time contributor team member, like a star wide receiver. If you don't have it on the same page of what you're supposed to be looking for, then you create this variation of what people know and what you assume people know. And that's where I would say my evaluation process has an advantage, according to people that I know who've been in the league. But my expertise in terms of football and scouting, I'm not even going to compare to some of the best scouts in the game. I know those guys are like fantastic, but that gives you an idea of the difference between a media scout like me, who has his own process, versus what the NFL's processes are, good or bad. And then as well as what the NFL knows, because you can have great players with great ability, but if they're not geared towards having the maturity or the ability to be good students and employees of the game, whether it's on the field or off the field, it doesn't matter what I see or don't see or what they see or don't see, because they may not even be good enough to be just everyday punch in the clock, in and out professionals.
Yeah, that's some awesome stuff. And thanks for sharing that difference with us and our audience, Matt. Just like Nick said, we got our copies of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, and I tell you what, it's awesome. So if you're out there listening to our podcast right now, definitely go pick up that copy. But one portion of the the Rookie Scouting Portfolio that I kind of want to hint on right now is the film study as the best evaluator of talent. So could you dive in a little bit deeper and talk about, just the film study and why is that the best evaluator of talent out there, Matt?
Yeah, because really, I mean, at the end of the day, the best analytics people I know, and I know some who have worked with multiple teams in the league, and they're not just working with some quality control coach, which doesn't mean that's a bad thing, but they're actually working. They've been hired by a GM directly to do the kind of work that they do. They have that kind of phone call relationship with the head of the organization in terms of the personnel department. And they're people who've also had scouting backgrounds. And what they'll tell you, and even the ones who don't have the scouting background, who are just straight up analytics, will tell you that the best analytics are a reflection of what you see on the field. And that if it doesn't mimic that on the field, it's not a reflection of that, then you need to question your process for the analytic. It shouldn't be that your analytic is going to replace the film. So analytics don't always give you, they're valuable, but if you rely solely on them, then you can wind up over filtering players out of your process who should belong there. For instance, there was a big time media analytic on wide receivers that if they were less than 6'2" in height and less than 210 pounds, I think, they were guys that people were recommending that you needed to filter out. Like, they don't even need to be a part of the equation. But, if you do that, then you're ruling out Deshaun Jackson, who's been one of the most, productive receivers in the past 10 to 15 years. You're figuring out Steve Smith, who might be one of the best receivers of all time. Wes Welker. You're ruling out Marvin Harrison, who was one of the best all-time receivers. Henry Ellard, Santana Moss. I mean, I could go on. Odell Beckham Jr. would not have even been in the conversation because he didn't quite hit that mark. And there are some teams that kind of had analytics people kind of recommend that let's filter out these players. And they're like, no, see, we don't want to go about that way. We understand what you're saying. So that's an important thing. But what we want to do is if a guy's underneath that figure that you've, been able to find some sort of correlation about, that we want to understand why that player is the exception to that. And if they're exceptional to that, that means they're probably an exceptional player. And we want to target exceptional players. We don't want to just get players who meet a curve. And that's what numbers often do is they say, it's the safe bet. Well, if you just focus on safe bets all the time, then you don't get exceptional players, and you're ruling yourself out for the great exceptions. And so the film helps you understand the relationships between the numbers and as well as what's going on the field, because you can look at a Steve Smith and you can see, well, he's not big, he's small, he's short, but he has incredible leverage. And how does that leverage work for him to express power? How does that leverage work for him to be able to win at the catch point? Oh, he has great leaping ability, so he can play bigger than his size. He takes contact well. He takes contact better than some 6'3" receivers that they're like the analytics are, favoring. You get more context out of the film. So the analytics should be like a good editor that understands the context of the film and then kind of packages it in a way that's most appealing, that can be helpful, most actionable in a most actionable way. But if you don't have the film first, then you don't have anything to work with, because if you're just doing the numbers, you're suddenly cutting off a great deal of valuable content.
All I'm doing is picturing the mid 2000s Jaguars receiving core with Ernest Wilford and Reggie
Jones.
Williams and Matt Jones, all 6'6", and none of it all that great. That's all I'm picturing.
And what was Keenan McCardle? I think Keenan McCardle was what, like 5'11", 6 feet?
Yeah, he's not super tall. Jimmy Smith's not super tall either, if I'm not mistaken. So
he wouldn't hit the cutoff either. I think it's 6 feet or 6'1".
Yeah,
And I think this is an interesting conversation that we're having right now, Matt, in regards to, just watching film and breaking down players through the film process and just looking at analytics and, the narrative, during this, particular draft that we're in right now is regard to Devontae Smith and his weight and his size. And, you have the analytic people out there who's saying, hey, the only receiver that has produced over 200 yards that was a first round pick is, within the last, 10, 15 years is Marquise Hollywood Brown from the Baltimore Ravens. So to your point, Matt, just like you said, like if you're just basing everything off analytics, you're kind of taken away from the prospect and, you're not really honing on the other things that he can do, whether his release off the ball, whether it's, his catching and, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is a great conversation for our audience out there to kind of, see the difference between breaking down film and just seeing it from an analytics standpoint.
Oh, absolutely. And it doesn't mean that Devonta Smith is without flaws and that he can't get pinned to the sideline by physical cornerback play, and he's got to figure out solutions to that. But and you could even make the argument, and I would listen to anybody saying this, that maybe he's not worth a first round pick. And I'm not saying him in general or him specifically, but receivers of that height and weight. Maybe you could say these are guys that are maybe too risky for a first round pick, and that you need to be, and what that tells me is that you need to have enough compelling criteria to mitigate that risk to counter that argument. And if you do, then you draft them. And I think that Devonta Smith does, so I'm okay with that. But what you want to get away from is having the analytics are the only answer and the final answer to everything. And I think sometimes what happens is that it's not the NFL analytics people that go too far. It's the media analytics people who are selling subscriptions that can have a bit of an air of finality to them, which as a result can produce a bit of a backlash or less trust in them because they are presenting their information with such certainty and using sometimes what I would call a shtick to say that the film doesn't matter, the film isn't important, or is the film makes mistakes and therefore the numbers we're mistake free or we're better off to go with, and I don't need to watch the film to do that. It's kind of like saying I don't need to learn grammar in order to be a writer. You might have a flair for telling a story, and that might be the analytics in that situation. But if you don't have just basic spelling and grammar, and you don't make, and I'm not talking like just people who accidentally use your and your incorrectly, or it's and it's, or things like that. But I'm talking like can't even piece together a full sentence on a regular basis, then it doesn't matter. And there are people out there in the community that sometimes they don't know the difference between a zone run and a gap scheme run, and what the difference between how running back approaches that, or they don't understand the importance of how, certain types of movements for wide receivers to get off press coverage is more important than whether you have the size to get off press, or why certain numbers matter more and apply to different things. Like, you can look at the 40 time and look at the history of the 40 time and say, well, the best running backs had 40 times, but on these numbers are the most productive. That's what they might put, or something like. But then you could say, well, that's fine, but there are lots of exceptions to that. And really, the most backs with the most production might be the guys who had better 20 and 3 shuttle, 3 cone times. And why is that? Well, do you understand how the game works enough to understand how the numbers apply to the field, or are you just saying, well, when I look at the information, the data just tells me this, and I've reversed engineered what I'm doing, and I'm creating some sort of correlation equals causation that's not true. And that's what often happens in those cases.
For anyone wondering why so many NFL draft picks don't work out, all of the variables Matt just laid out, and then plus do it from the team's perspective, like what scheme they're being dropped in, and 100 other variables coming from the NFL side, you can see why the puzzle pieces don't always fit for what you just laid out there, Matt.
Yeah, or you look at guys like Paxton Lynch, who wanted to spend more time playing PlayStation than he did wanting to work on the tape, and really study the film and work at his game. Or a guy like Chad Kelly, who had all the talent in the world, in my opinion, to be the starting quarterback, and was on the precipice of doing so. But because he can't stay out of trouble and he creates issues for himself off the field, he was basically a weekend away from being the starter for the Denver Broncos, and probably would have been there. They wouldn't have ever had to draft Drew Lock. I mean, this guy, and he would have been way better than Drew Lock if you ask me. But this is a guy that was a weekend away, went to a Halloween party with his teammates, and basically got drunk, and I think probably got stoned, picked a fight with his teammates, and then wound up and walking in somebody's apartment and sitting down in the middle of their apartment in the middle of the night. And he's never going to get a starting job. He may not ever have, he may still be on the third string of a team, but no team's going to want to use him, even though he's unbelievably talented. They don't feel like they can trust him to be the leader at the, handling the controls of a franchise. And nothing of that has to do with his incredible talent. This is a guy that before Deshaun Watson came to, Clemson, Chad Kelly was a dual threat quarterback. So when they said, you may have heard him ridiculous. People will say last year, it was ridiculous. He said he was faster than every quarterback in the league other than Lamar Jackson. Well, if you actually studied the film and knew about Chad Kelly, you'd know that what he said was not a lie. He actually, you go watch him against Georgia, and this is after he came off of a hernia surgery and an ACL tear, and he's outrunning cornerbacks and safeties, splitting them for 50-yard gains. Where they had angles on him, and he wasn't even in shape yet from dealing with those injuries. So this was a special talent who blew it.
Man, yeah, another factor you lay out there. So it's like that's what, you just feel like there's so many blown picks every year. There's why right there. Yeah. But hey, let's go. Let's dive right into the quarterbacks. And the quarterback conversation, I always tell Robert, everyone spends time talking about the first round. I don't want to talk about the first round all the time, but we're going to talk about these first round guys because some of this, the conversation just starts to get there's so much groupthink. I'm going a little nutty listening to it, and I want to know what Matt Waldman thinks, all right? So I'm going to throw out 3 items here for you and get your reaction to them. So the number one is Zach Wilson is 100% going to be the number 2 quarterback to the Jets off the board. That's the item number one that's driving me a little crazy. Love Zach Wilson at BYU, great player, but just to have the consensus number 2, I'm not all in on that one. Curious what you think on that. San Francisco is strongly considering Mac Jones over Justin Fields. That seems to be a very popular narrative. Justin Fields taking some hits the last few weeks, got a little bit. It felt like this weekend the Fields PR machine was in gear, kind of like churning some things out, but Justin Fields kind of like going into the season was really Lawrence Fields. Lawrence Fields is at 1 and 2, and our guy from the University of Florida, Kyle Trask, he's nearly invisible in most draft conversations. I feel like toward the end of 2020, a lot of people were talking about him, maybe a late round, first round draft pick, and now I'm seeing him like out of into the 3rd or 4th. So it's just interesting. You see, I would have put Jones and Trask pretty close together in December, and now there seems to be a pretty wide gap. How do you react to those 3 things?
Yeah, great questions. And I think for me, Zach Wilson, I'm just not a fan. I don't believe that Zach Wilson is in the same tier as Lawrence, Lance, Mac Jones, or Justin Fields. And I would even argue that Davis Mills is a more promising all-around prospect. But that doesn't mean that Zach Wilson can't be a starter in the league and a decent starter. I just think that there is a more defined system for him to fit into. And the team that traded up to basically say that it's likely that he's going to be on their team, the Jets, has that system. You know, they want to be a outside wide zone, play action pass, give the quarterback half the field to read oftentimes. And it's not that Zach Wilson can't read the entire field. It's just that giving him more focused opportunities where he can roll out and throw in those situations are better, because if you put him in an offense with more situations where he's got to make more full field reads, he tends to go for aggressive decisions that aren't always the best decisions, where he's gotten away with them at BYU. Part of that is that he hasn't seen an off coverage with defenders squatting over the top of a receiver opposite hash that he won't throw. And it's one of those deals where he'll throw these balls and he'll get away with it, but you can see the quality of the ball. You can see the distance of the defender. You can then look at the NFL game and understand that if you watch enough NFL tape, that the college defender made it close enough of a near interception or a breakup of the pass. In the NFL, they're going to be an extra step to that, and that the quality of the throw, the velocity wasn't quite there because the mechanics need a little bit of work with that front foot. So he has some issues there. You know, there's some issues with him throwing what I call hospital balls, or a lot of people may call them that, but they're, slants in the 4th quarter with big leads, leading your receiver into a safety. And you saw the safety coming. You saw where that was going to be before you even threw the ball. You know, these are types of things that he's got to fix. Some of the work that he's got in the pocket. I just feel like that this is a player that reminds me a lot of Baker Mayfield, which I wasn't a high on Baker Mayfield, but I understand that he's a player that if you put enough around him, give him a strong running game, a good defense, and you give him an offense where you're not making him carry the load like a Patrick Mahomes or a Matthew Stafford, or, and I'm giving you a big range of number 1 quarterbacks right there, but in that range, if you say Stafford's on the low end of a do-it-all QB and Patrick Mahomes is at the highest end, he's not in there. Neither is Baker Mayfield. They're guys that they may make, if there's 5 plays that a defense says we're going to make you win it for the offense. Most quarterbacks who are average quarterbacks, they might make 2 of those plays every week. If they make 3, they win. If they make 2, they lose. The best quarterbacks make 3 to 5 of those every week and keep their team in it. And the below average quarterbacks maybe make 1 or 2 on a regular basis. And to me, Baker Mayfield, Zach Wilson are more in that 1 to 2 range, maybe get to 3 on a good day. But if you can limit the number of plays that the defense forces them to have to make like that happen per game, then the better off you're going to be, because he doesn't have to win it all on his own. And I think while people love Zach Wilson for the creativity with his game, again, the way that he plays, that isn't going to work as well in the NFL, because it's a lot like Mayfield. They both have good enough arms, but they don't have good enough accuracy at the pinpoint level. And most accuracy stats you see aren't about pinpoint passing and what that actually means. And that's another part of like analytics versus film study, because when I studied Baker Mayfield, you could look at the red zone, you could look at how late he was with throws, where he waited 2 to 3 beats too long, or that he was consistently hitting receivers, but why is he always behind Odell Beckham? Why is he always throwing behind or over or under somebody, and they're having to make adjustments where it's just impossible for them to catch the ball, or they get their hands on it, but it's contested now and the defender gets a hit and now it's dropped. Those happened over and over for Baker Mayfield. And people were like, this is new. And I'm like, no, it's not. He was doing this at Oklahoma. It's just the fact of the matter is that they were playing Big 12 teams with wide open coverage looks where you didn't get as much man-to-man, where it forced you to be that accurate. But when you face an SEC team like Georgia in the second half of that game, and they put, cover corners on them tight, who could be athletic enough to keep up with those receivers, you saw the same results. And the same thing you can project with Zach Wilson. So I'm not big on Wilson on that level. I see him as a potential starter and being decent enough for that fit, but he's not for everyone. And I don't think he's worth the number 2 pick in a nutshell. Mac Jones, listen, I like Mac Jones, and we've talked about him on this show in the past. So what I'll just say is that he's more of a, my buddy Mark Schofield, who you guys, I believe, have.
We're gonna have him on in a couple weeks.
Yep.
Yeah.
He penned an article at my site where I've talked about task-oriented versus creative or intuitive. Mm-hmm. And I've talked about how Marcus Mariota was a task-oriented quarterback, and how the highest end task-oriented quarterback is Tom Brady. Marcus Mariota is kind of the slightly below average version of that.
Define task-oriented for us.
Yeah. Task-oriented is a guy that understands that basically if you tell him he's going to complete everything you ask him to do in terms of understanding the offense, what the play will be, what the defense is supposed to show, where his receivers are supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But if the task, if what he has planned and the task that he's supposed to execute doesn't go according to the plan, he short circuits if he's not the highest end task oriented guy. Because like a Tom Brady would know, here's the 5 things that I have to be aware of on each play. But he also knows, here's the 5 contingencies that I might have to deal with. And I know that the defense might do this, or this. Whereas with Marcus Mariota, he's more like, I know the 5 things I have to do, but I'm probably only capable of processing 2 or 3 of the contingencies. And I may know them on the whiteboard, and I may know all 5, but when it's on the field, I can't process it as fast as Tom. Tom makes it look like he's just playing off the cuff and doing that, but he's much more of a, you can pin him into a corner. Very rarely does it happen, but when you do, you see that task-oriented thing go downhill. Pat Mahomes is more of an intuitive guy, where it's like he understands the offense and the defense, but it's also like he sees the leverage so quickly that he reacts to it in a way where he can be off structure, or Russell Wilson can be off structure. Russell Wilson's a good example of a guy who may need more task-oriented in his life, but he's that it doesn't matter. And I loved Russell Wilson. But
Russell Wilson just texted, he says offensive line sucks. So
yeah, that's true. And I would be on that point. I would be an apologist for him. But that's kind of the difference between the two. Brett Favre is the ultimate creative quarterback. I mean, he came up with the RPO for heaven's sake, so that's a guy, when someone goes, well, why'd you do that? Because I can, that's kind of the ultimate creative version. Whereas if you say, why did you do that? And the guy's like, well, here's the 5 things that are happening, and then here's what I'm looking at. And that's kind of the difference. And you can sum it up also by baker and chef. Bakers follow recipes to the exact T because you have to, whereas chefs are always like, Do I need to add more of this ingredient, add less? I can improvise a little bit with the heat. I can change things up according to the environment. But with baking, you have to have a perfect environment. Mac Jones is kind of more of that. He's like a higher end Kirk Cousins, who's more of a baker, task oriented player. And so he's that way. And then when you look at, when you look at him from that perspective, he'd be a good fit in a place like San Francisco. But what you're hoping to get is a more conceptually sound, pocket savvy quarterback than Jimmy Garoppolo, with a little bit less arm, but good enough to do the job. So they're looking for, if they get Mac Jones, they're looking for a better manager of the game, with some high-end skills to be able to make big plays based on his conceptual acumen and baseline of technical skill. Trask, it was funny when we first talked about him. One of the things I really loved about his game, he's so great up the seam. Like you throw him, he throws that ball up the seam, and he's got total confidence to be able to like pinpoint throw some of those balls. I like some of his movement in the pocket, but I found with him some of the things that were, I guess maybe a little lacking for me with Trask. I just felt like that he knows the math of the game, like he understands the concepts, and he knows where his receivers are going to be, but he's like that kid, like it's like the task-oriented guy. He's kind of task-oriented to the degree that I know that the right answer, like if my second read doesn't come open, my third read's on the opposite side of the field, but he doesn't bother to check to see if the third read's actually open. Like he knows it should be, he knows where it's supposed to be, and he throws to that spot, but he's not like, does the defender also know where I'm going here? And I think that he doesn't have the nuance of like execution at the highest level with what he knows. He knows more than what he can execute.
Can you learn that? You can learn that though, right? Or is that something that you find more natural?
I think that's more natural. It's more of a performance-oriented thing. He may get better at it, but I think it's harder than it's saying, like drop back footwork's easy. Like, that's like every quarterback, even if you don't use 5 and 7 step drops, you're going to learn that in camp. That's something pretty easy. Throwing motion's a little harder. Well, this is kind of in the heat of battle. Can your mind focus on the right thing at that split second moment? I think that's harder. And I think that's why, he fell down my boards a bit. Like he's lower than I thought he would be. I do think that he's a guy that could be a good backup in the NFL and maybe be a starter who can bridge a team and maybe even have a good year or two. Like John Kitna was a guy who had a Pro Bowl year, or a guy like Andy Dalton has had some Pro Bowl years. Are they guys in terms of how we look at the NFL today and say they're franchise quarterbacks? Most people would say, most fans would say, oh, those guys stink, and then football people would say, no, you're being too hard on them. They're competent quarterbacks in the NFL, but the competent quarterbacks aren't the guys that get the long contracts or get the second deal. And I think he's one of those guys that I just don't know if he's ever going to get a second deal as to be a starter.
I tell you what, Matt, every time Andy Dalton name is, brought around me, I feel a certain type of way. And the reason for that is because I'm a Vikings fan. And, in that same draft, we drafted Christian Ponder instead of Andy Dalton. I was pretty livid. So I tell you what, I know Andy Dalton gets a lot of flack for not necessarily being that franchise quarterback, just like you mentioned, but he has won a lot of games. And I tell you what, Andy Dalton and Christian Ponder, if I had to, do that over again, I would definitely take Andy Dalton again for that one.
No doubt. It's a great point. And that's the thing. It's like you can't blame Andy Dalton for what happened in Dallas. I mean, if anything, Andy Dalton has a bone to pick with his offensive line for what happened to him in that Washington game. And he's a guy that certainly could have helped that team. I mean, certainly Dak Prescott is a much better quarterback for that environment. Mainly because he can create in addition to hang in the pocket, whereas Dalton isn't going to do it at the same level. But for a guy who's a borderline, whether you conservatively say he's a borderline starter, I'd say he's an adequate starter in the league who can, so for you to have him in the as a backup is quite a gift. And I think that, I'm totally with you on that front. So Kyle Trask certainly has that potential. I just think that when teams are drafting quarterbacks right now, they do tend to draft for upside. And I think that there are probably 4 to 6 guys. There are easily 4 to 6 guys who may have more upside than Kyle Trask. But that doesn't mean that their floors are, their floors may be even a little lower.
It's a good point. It's a good point there. Hey, Chris Sims made headlines a few weeks back when he released his QB draft rankings, and he's with Florio, so he's got a big stage, obviously. But he'll make a few statements here or there leading up to the draft that tend to get attention. But big one with the quarterbacks. He had Kellen Mond at number 4 behind Zach Wilson at 1, Trevor Lawrence, and then Mac Jones. So Rob and I were talking, and it's clear there's such a wide gap on what people think about Kellen Mond if he's seeing the number 4 prospect in the draft here versus some people see Mond as a number 3 pick, day 3 pick in the draft overall, rounds 4 through 7. But how does such a gap in evaluation exist for a single prospect, and why do you think there's a wide gap in what scouts are seeing with Kellen Mond?
It's, it goes back to that whole idea of answering the phone, and the job of answering the phone. When you look at your evaluation process, what is it? Is it, for a former quarterback, is it that you just watch tape and eat popcorn and drink some beer and basically cut it on and take a few notes on a Mead notepad and just write free form what you think of it, and you don't keep track systematically of what you're looking for? Or if you do keep systematic track of what you're looking for, how do you value those things? Are you overvaluing certain traits compared to other people? Is athletic ability more important to you, or arm strength more important to you than your ability to process the leverage of coverage? And I don't know what Chris Sims is looking at. So it's like, he could be looking at it and saying, what, to me, certain things can be taught, certain things can't be. But then you might look at him and say, well, what's his frame of reference? Did he process coverage quickly? Does he even understand? I mean, and I don't mean to insult him saying this, but I'm just saying, does he even understand the importance of looking at leverage and reading that quickly? Because, there are literally, I can't tell this story. I so wish I could, but I will just say that there is a quarterback in the past 15 years who got crossed off a board, and a very good quarterback at that, like a good starting quarterback. And I'm probably understating how good, who basically read the leverage of coverage in a workout with veteran players and threw a touchdown. And the coaching staff at that time got angry because of that, because they thought he ignored the check down that he should have thrown, and that he was too prone to taking a risk in this situation. And the defense was all arguing on behalf of the quarterback prospect, and the coaching staff was like, no, so what that means is sometimes people value things differently, and they may not even understand the value of that in the long term. They may be afraid of something that may not exist, or so when you look at all of that, it's just like, there is going to be a big variation, especially in the media community, because you don't know what their frame of what their process is, how they score, what they value for what they score. We may even look at the same things, which I doubt. We often look at very different things, but if the things that we look at that are the same, they might, the value that we put on them might be radically different. So I think that's why you get that, is that I noticed this just in general. If you watch the NFL 100, which I've only seen like the video YouTube clips of certain players, but what I've noticed watching maybe, 40 or 50 of them over the past how many years they've been doing it? 4 or 5 years?
That sounds right. Oh
yeah.
The 100th anniversary was what, 2 years ago, Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so if it's something like that, when I watch those, I find that NFL athletes, what they value about these players more than anything isn't their conceptual understanding of the game or specifically their technique. The first thing that comes out of their mouths, or the majority of things that comes out of their mouths, except for maybe the top players who are critiquing these other guys, is athletic ability. They're just as blown away by great athletic ability as anything else. And
this guy made my life miserable for a Sunday.
Yeah, he's
Basically.
unbelievable. He's so quick. He's so strong. His hands are so fast. He's just like the cuts that he makes are just unbelievable. He's just got such great stamina. And it's like, and then occasionally you'll hear, then you ask, like, they'll ask like the all-pro player, and he'll be like, the moves that he's cultivated and the way that he varies them up and the way that he can use his hips to do this and conjunction with this and the way that he reads the field. And then you're like, that's what I've been looking for. But usually it's like 1 out of 10 players, and the other 9 are like, he's fast, he's strong, because that's, I mean, that's not their job. Their job is to be players, and they're thinking about their own thing. Their job isn't to be scouts. So we have a lot of former players in that capacity. And so I'm not trying to downgrade guys, because like JT O'Sullivan is unbelievable. He's
awesome.
He wasn't an unbelievable pro quarterback, but he certainly wasn't. He's awesome at what he does. And that's something that you see the process and you see the detail with his game, where other folks, you also happen to wonder and you go, are they doing this for clicks?
That's true. That is true. It's good to have some controversial opinions, isn't it? Once in a while on that for clicks. Well, hey, this is one question Rob and I struggled with a little bit, because at first on the surface, it seems really dumb. I'm just going to be frank with our question here. But we were kind of thinking about the quarterback position in general, and maybe you're the wrong person to ask because you got such a depth in how you analyze all the positions here. But do quarterbacks basically get a break for playing lesser competition in the eyes of scouts versus other positions? Like where, like, let's say you got an offensive tackle trying to come out of D2 to get drafted. How much does that guy get penalized for playing D2 competition versus, like, we're talking about like Zach Wilson and Trey Lance, easily top 10 picks this year, even though arguably they didn't play that Power 5 competition week in and week out. Are quarterbacks basically easier to read against lesser competition than other positions?
I don't know, because it seemed at the beginning of the year that people were really kind of downplaying Trey Lance because of the lack of great statistical production, as well as the fact of who he was playing and the type of offense that he was in. But now he's in that top 5 conversation in terms of, or a first round conversation, so I'm hopeful that they're coming around a bit, but I don't know if it's just because it's a specific year and this is an exceptional situation or not. So the best answer I have for you is my answer. I would probably say no, but this year might prove exceptional, and we'll ask me again in 3 or 4 years and we might have a better answer.
That's good.
Sounds good, Matt. So we're definitely going to switch gears and go to the running back position. So one of my first questions, coming from the running back position, is that out there we always talk about the contact balance, and we talk about running backs kind of creating yards for their own selves, even when the offensive line is not blocking. So could you just emphasize and talk to our audience about the impact of having that contact balance and creating yards on your own at the running back position?
Yeah, I think it's vital. And it's one of those things that it's different than power. Power to me is about pushing defenders backwards, dragging defenders, carrying them on your back, and breaking through wraps or reaches for your frame. Those are expressions of power to me. Contact balance to me is about, can you bounce off a hit? Can you bounce off, some sort of that form of contact, a push, a strike, a hit of some form, whether it's directly coming straight at you or indirectly. And who's it coming from? Is it coming from a safety or a cornerback, or is it coming from a linebacker or a defensive tackle? And so I grade those things in the RSP. I literally differentiate that stuff and how I track running backs to show who's bounced off that kind of contact, who's run through certain types of wraps, reaches, and hits. and from what type of defender. So to me, the reason I started doing that recently is that when I look back at my database filled with evaluations, I found that I don't remember how many it was, but I think it's 750 backs I looked at over probably a 13 to 14 year period at that time. And there were 2 backs who failed my criteria for contact balance. There were only 2 who actually started in the league for a period of time of more than one season and were 1,000-yard backs, like productive rushers.
Peyton Hillis and who else?
No, Peyton Hillis didn't fail it. But the one guy who did fail it was Marlon Mack.
Ooh.
Marlon Mack failed that, and he's the exception that proves the rule, because the rest of those guys, I mean, like, if a good example, maybe another guy who maybe you could squeeze in there, but was never nearly as good as people thought, was Darren McFadden. When you look at Darren McFadden, he could run downhill 15 yards and get that speed up and then try and drop those pads, and he'd run into a safety who was flat-footed and fall backwards. I mean, like, you'd see it over and over on his tape at Arkansas, and that was problematic. And certainly had the speed, and he could run gap plays. But he needed a map and directions with the Cowboys, even with that big season he had behind their great offensive line. There's plays you could literally see him stopping and looking like he was looking both ways to cross the street to find the next back of the crease. It was insane. It was like, but really, you need to have a level of contact bounce where you can at least bounce off indirect contact from a linebacker. If you can't at least do that as a running back, odds are you're not going to have an effective career in the NFL, at least based on what I've seen. And if you do, it's because you probably are an excellent gap runner who can get a lot of yards downhill with your speed and burst. So that means gap players like Tevin Coleman and Marlon Mack are probably good examples of that.
So, Matt, we're seeing more and more in college football, and this might not be your forte, talking about the transfer portal here, but we're seeing guys transfer over, like, it's just becoming a huge thing in college football. I'm not getting the starting gig. I'm going to transfer somewhere else. We saw at North Carolina, though, this year, Mac Brown, the Tar Heels, they boasted one of the best backfields in America with Senior Bowl star Michael Carter, second-team All-ACC back Javonte Williams. And as the transfer portal continues to grow, like play a growing role in college football, is there value in sharing duties at the college level from a scouting standpoint? Basically, do you feel NFL evaluators are beginning to place more value on running backs with less tread on their tires coming into the league than an old-fashioned workhorse running back? Because we're not even seeing a lot of workhorse running backs in the league anymore.
I would say, while we'll see if that argument proves to be correct, I would say the answer is no. And the reason that I'd say it's no is that based on the studies I've done, what analytics people will tell you is that when a player has proven that they can handle a high workload without injury, they tend to handle the high workload without injury in the NFL.
That's true.
So Adrian Peterson, Cedric Benson, Ray Rice, Ricky Williams, these are just some. Rudy Johnson. I'm trying to think. There's a number.
Derrick Henry modern day, right?
Derrick Henry modern day. There are a lot of players who in the past 20 years that you can look at and say they handled a high workload. They didn't get hurt, and they didn't get hurt much in the NFL, and they were able to produce at a high level.
Interesting.
And so, to me, it's the whole tread on the tire thing. Bobby Rainey was a good example of a guy who was just a special teams guy and a part-time running back, but had some good games as a running back for the Buccaneers and the Giants when needed. But he was a good special teams player for 3 different teams and had a pretty long career. And he was an absolute workhorse during his career. So if anything, I would say it still matters. Because now you don't even know whether they can handle that workload if you need them to, because they haven't proven it.
All right, so keep hitting the transfer portal, kids. That's what we're hearing. Keep hitting the transfer portal.
and we all know now, unless you're one of those rah-rah alums who just want your team to be the best thing ever, and you're not even looking at it clearly, then you got to understand that you, as the alum, has made college football the business it is. And because you made it the business that it is, players are now trying to get the best that they possibly can get out of it, because there's no guarantee that they're going to get a chance to graduate. There's no guarantee that they're going to be allowed. And I say this as someone who's worked at universities and seen other people talk about their universities. And, I'm not going to name names, but certainly we've seen plenty of history of players who are very intelligent young men get steered out of majors that would make them a lot more money long-term than an NFL contract and the length of time that they play, because the alums demand that they're in the best possible, shape and situation and preparedness to be able to play and contribute for their team so that they can enjoy their beer and their skybox seats and whatever else.
Well, on a superficial football fan level too, I think we're all better off seeing Joe Burrow at LSU than on the bench at Ohio State too. So it's
Sure.
worked out. It's been a cool thing in college football. Last running back question here. So one of the under the radar running backs we like, and full disclosure, we're biased because he came on the podcast and we watched a lot of his tape leading up to it. But Caleb Huntley out of Ball State, good power back, runs really well on that. Saw you had him rated highly in the power column. You got star caliber for Caleb Huntley in the power column, I believe, on the RSP. Who is a day 3 running back? We see this every year where running backs go under the radar all the time. Who is a day 3 running back that you could see earning a starting role by the end of the year? We saw that obviously undrafted, but James Robinson down in Jacksonville had quite a year last year.
He certainly did. And I think that, when you look at the players that are available in this particular class who are possibly day 3 guys who could play and do well, I think Kylan Hill's going to slip. And I think that's going to be kind of humorous, for in the long run, because this is a guy that ended up having to play with KJ Costello, who was not a very good quarterback in Mike Leach's system. And Mike Leach's system basically took the ball out of Kylan Hill's hands behind the line of scrimmage and just used him as a dump off pass catcher, which is fine. He can do that very well. And he's a very good receiver out of the backfield. But this is a guy you want running the ball between the tackles. He has the quickness, he has the footwork, he has the strength. He has the vision to be able to run multiple types of schemes and do it well. I think he's going to slip because they're going to look at the production. They're going to look at that he didn't have that steady trajectory upward, and he's going to wind up early day 3 as a guy that you can consider who I think would wind up being could be a starter or at least a high-end contributor who's in a committee and a productive committee back.
Opted out, I believe, too. He's one of those early opt-outs at Mississippi State. But, yeah, that's a good name right there. He certainly, anyone who watched that early season, that LSU game, I mean, he played quite a starring role in that game as well. I'm going to kick it over to Rob for the wide receivers.
Yeah, man.
Or running back. One more running back question. Sorry.
Yeah. So, once again, Matt, we went through an unprecedented season in 2020 where many players chose to opt out or were only able to showcase their abilities in a small window of games. So how difficult is it to evaluate a player who sat out, this past season? For example, Chris Evans, running back from Michigan. So could you just talk about how, difficult it is to scout a player and to break down, a player when they're kind of lacking film compared to other players?
I think it's a risk when you see a player who just has a bit part on their team. And I think Chris Evans had more of a bit part in a lot of games, even before he opted out, or before the suspension and everything that happened with him. But you look at his, so you look at it and say, well, is there enough on tape to show me what he can and can't do? And I think that's the big question, is that when you have those limited reps between the tackles, you could be prone to either say he can't do these things because he didn't have success in those limited exposures, or you could be prone to say if he did have success that he's going to be great because he hit some big runs. And, so he's a player that there's more variability to the outcome when you have fewer exposures to a player. And that's what makes it difficult, is that you might have just seen him in moments where you can be prone to being a little too hard or easy on him. And I try to make my process in such a way where I'm really looking at what that player was capable of doing, regardless of what's around him in terms of talent. But still, when you have limited reps, there's times that it can get muddled, and you may not have a clear view of what that player is capable of, or what they're, or it's too bright and shiny.
Well, we're going to leave the running back position, man, and we're going to hop into the wide receivers and tight ends. And just to start, you actually use a term in regards to receivers clapping at the ball. So could you expound on that and kind of tell our audience, we hear the alligator arm terminology, we heard clapping at the ball, but could you just go in depth in regards to, breaking down the receiver and using that term with a particular receiver?
Sure. With receivers and the techniques that they need to use with their hands to catch the ball, when you have a pass that's usually anywhere numbers high and above, you're going to use the technique where you're going to have your thumbs together, you're going to have your fingers together, kind of making that diamond type of shape so that the ball strikes your fingertips. And you want the ball to kind of arrive spinning and meeting those fingertips where they're joined. And so that what happens is that each of your fingertips are, because of the wonders of the engineering of our body, they can individually stop the spin of the ball better and faster with a myriad of like microscopic adjustments that your brain isn't even doing, or consciously doing. And so as a result, it slows the spin of the ball and it limits recoil. So you want to have your hands in that position to do that. You also do it with underhand, where you have your hands with your pinkies together like that. But what often happens when you're clapping on the ball, usually happens with high hands technique like this, is that when receivers go to extend for the ball or go high or away from their frame, their hands come together like this and they're clapping onto the ball, and they end up either not being able to get their fingers on the ball and their palms strike the ball first, and that create that big piece of surface area on your palms, which has no engineering ability to make the adjustments that your fingers can. It's like hitting the side of barn doors, and you're clapping onto it, and it creates a massive recoil with the ball. And as a result of that, that's why you see guys fight the ball, because when it hits their hands instead of their palms, it's a violent recoil, and now it's either bouncing off their hands and then their chest or into the air, and the recoil is very violent and the ball's knuckling or it goes faster. Whereas if it bounces off your fingertips, it's like a soft recoil, and it looks like it's just kind of floating up there. So when you see a receiver who catches with his hands not make the initial catch and they hit their fingertips first, you'll see the ball tends to just kind of float, and it's an easier second chance opportunity. So what happens is these guys, when they're coming up for the ball, they're trying to do this in the same way that, like, if you teach a little boy or a little girl how to catch a ball, and the first thing they do is and forehead, that's a more dramatic version of that. But that's what's happening is with these receivers, they don't have their technique down to where their hands are together like this when they go up. The best guys, when they go up with their hands are already together. The other guys, you'll see great athletes. Cortland Sutton is this way. Cortland Sutton, you'll see him a lot on his SMU tape and even early Denver tape, catching the ball mostly with his right hand. Because he can't get that left hand up in time. And so you'll see him fight some of the balls with this early on in his career. And he's been able to do it despite some of these issues. But in SMU, watch his SMU tape again, go on YouTube and find it, and you'll see him drop balls. And because he does, it's because he's clapping or he can't get both hands on it at the same time, and it hits one, and then he's fighting it. And that's what happens with some of these guys. Is it's a common issue. And they have to focus on getting their hands extended together so the fingertips are already together when it's at the highest point. Because if they do it late, it's too late. And then the ball's coming, and even if they're clapping with their fingertips, that's no good, because the ball then usually slides through their fingertips and hits off their face mask.
Well, I tell you what, Matt, with that breakdown, you're giving me a lot of, one of my favorite movies, giving me a lot of the Little Giants vibes in regards to, the wide receiver trying to catch the passes, and then he goes and try to catch, toilet paper because it's a little softer. But just making that transition, I tell you one player who doesn't, clap at the ball, who actually plucks the ball out of the air. And, I just want to go out there and ask this question. Of course, Kyle Pitts. I really think, he's one of those guys who actually catches with his fingertips how they, you kind of hear surrounding the receiver position or the tight end position. But my question to you, Matt, this has been a question that's been thrown out there in the media and also, on the NFL level. Is Kyle Pitts not only the best tight end in the draft, but is he the best receiver in the draft?
It's a great question. He would have been in my top 3 as a receiver. Wow. I would say I would still put Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle above him as a receiver. But if you're looking for but you got to remember, I'm just picking guys in general for all their traits and all the potential of their traits. If you're asking me, I need a big receiver at the sideline who can win in the red zone and be physical and be a rebounder. Who else are you going to take? You're going to take Kyle Pitts. I mean, that's like, it doesn't matter who it is. I mean, there's not another receiver that I would pick, wide receiver I would pick. Now, if you're going to say, I need a game breaker in the open field who can, run every route at a high level and get off the line of scrimmage and make some, tough plays, then I'd say, well, Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle certainly have more of that game breaking ability to make people miss in the open field, and some of the routes that they run, you would say, okay, Pitts may not do that as well. No, again, it depends on what your offense is. And I think there's enough offenses that would say, heck yeah, I'm taking Kyle Pitts first. It doesn't matter what we call him. He's going to catch passes, and that's what matters.
That's awesome. So I definitely want to stick on the tight end position group. So, outside of Kyle Pitts, what is one tight end that kind of jumps off your draft board that you think is going to, have a pretty successful career coming out this year?
It's a boring answer, but I love Pat Freiermuth. I think that this guy as a blocker is one of the better blockers I've seen in the past 2 to 3 years at the position. He's a guy that understands how to use his hands, get off the line with with his body aligned in a good way, and use his feet and executes a number of blocks well, effectively. You can rely on him as an inline guy. He's not a speedster. So, if you want to have him win up the seam, you're going to have to use play action. But there are a lot of tight ends you can't even win up the seam using play action with them. So the fact that he's at least quick enough to do that is a plus. He can win the ball in tight coverage. He's a strong runner after the catch in terms of, contact balance, fluidity. He's my buddies at Football Guys compare him to Heath Miller, which I think is a big compliment. Even though you may look at his production and say Heath Miller didn't have great production. Some guys on Twitter who follow me joke around and call him Rob Slokowski, which I actually kind of like, but I look at it as a compliment to say, because Rob Slokowski is pretty darn good. So I think that he's I think he's the easiest answer.
Got you. I know you have to get out of here, Matt. So we're going to wrap this up. So, I'm going to take us home with this last question. And in regards to the wide receiver position group, just like Nick said, we really didn't want to focus on those tier 1 guys from the receiver group, like the Devontae Smith, the Jalen Waddles, and the Rashad Batemans. But one, wide receiver prospect that really intrigues me is Elijah Moore from Ole Miss. So could you just talk about his skill set and where do you see him kind of ending up in this draft?
Yeah, it's funny. I think people are kind of mixed on him, but I see him as a guy that he reminds me of kind of a Jarvis Landry type with more speed. Because he's just automatic catching the football. I think if you were to say who's the most reliable receiver on the board in terms of just making the catch, and doing it the right way over and over and over again, it's him. I think he's going to be a red zone presence because he finds those tight little creases and knows how to get open in zones. And he has that run after the catch ability that, while he's not necessarily like a tackle breaker on a large level, or the moves you see aren't insane, he does have that speed and burst. And he's a guy that, while I don't agree with the Lane Kiffin assessment that he's the next Steve Smith, I think Steve Smith's, I've got him on my spectrum, but it's kind of like saying, you're a mid-level accountant and this guy is like the CEO of like Virgin American Records. You ain't ever getting there, buddy. I'm sorry, but like you certainly might be able to run your own accounting firm and be a millionaire one day, but like you're not going to be owning your own private island. And I think that's kind of where I look at Elijah Moore, is that goes up and wins the ball. He's tough, finds open zones well. You can put him in the backfield. So there's a little bit of a little bit of a Danny Woodhead element for him. Maybe not necessarily as good of a runner as Woodhead was, but you can use him there. And a smart team to me would use him in the red zone as that movable piece, that like backfield, wing, slot, outside, and do tons of things with him that like keeps defenses guessing. And because he has enough skill to be more than a gadget, putting him in those different spots just makes him doubly dangerous.
Great. So now we're going to have to watch him play for the Patriots based on that description. Yeah. More love for the Patriots. Matt, hey, man, we went over our 45-minute goal by quite a bit here, but we can listen to you talk for quite a while, man. Fascinating stuff. Give you a chance real quick. You want to plug the rookie scouting portfolio to the folks?
Sure. The RSP has been around 16 years. You can find it at mattwaldmanrsp.com. It's available for $21.95. You get 1,058 pages that are all bookmarked in PDF form. Easy to look through everything, that give you complete scouting profiles on quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, as well as rankings, and taking you through my process in an entertaining way that helps enlighten you a little bit more about the differences between these players. And then you get a post-draft guide that comes along with it. So if you're a fantasy player, you just want to learn more about how I view these players in terms of their post-draft fit with these teams for the next 1 to 2 or 3 years, I do that as well 1 week after the draft, and that's all one package for $21.95. And you get put on a newsletter also that comes out June through December, so that you can basically learn more about how I view these players and what they're doing in camps, as well as the 2022 class, give you previews to that. And last but not least, a percentage of these sales up to a certain amount that I have a cutoff of $5,000 goes to Darkness to Light, an organization devoted to preventing sexual abuse of children through training in university settings, individuals, civic groups, schools, companies, businesses, law enforcement, all of that, as well as helping them understand how to deal with kids who've been victimized so that they don't compound the problem. I've been giving to that organization since I think 2011, when the Penn State scandal broke out. And I already gave $4,000 last year, thanks to my readers who purchased early. I'll probably be giving another 1,000 probably within the next couple of months. So I'm very proud to be able to do that, because this month is Abuse Awareness Month, Child Abuse Awareness Month. So it's great to be able to donate it to that cause early. I usually donate at the end of the year. But so yeah, if you want to donate to a great cause, it happens to 1 in 4 children, unfortunately. And it's not a death knell for their lives if it happens. It's something that if you understand and learn a little bit more, you can be a cause in helping children have better lives and better childhoods as a result, if they've had to deal with that type of thing, which is very hard for society to talk about. Certainly a great cause, and you're getting to be entertained while you've contributed to that cause.
Right. So you get to support a great cause. Obviously, that's an awesome cause there, Matt. Get to support a great cause and beat your friends in fantasy football. And if I need to sell you on anything more than that, than beating your friends in fantasy football, come on, that's good enough right there for most people. Hey, Matt Waldman, RSP.com. Go get the rookie scouting portfolio as soon as you can. Download it. You can download it. It comes right away into your inbox. Check it out. Matt, thanks again for coming on the show tonight. And we'll send you out with our word from our sponsor, CoachPaint.
American Football Stories is brought to you by CoachPaint. CoachPaint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. CoachPaint offers the ability to clearly tell a straight video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with CoachPaint today.
Thank you for listening to American Football Stories podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Football Stories. We are working to grow our network on YouTube and we'd love to have you subscribe. You can find us also on Apple Podcasts, on Twitter at American FB Story, and on our website, AmericanFootballStories.com. I am Robert Parker. My co-host is Nick Knudsen. This has been another episode of American Football Stories.